That's not what my topic is about. I want to get back on the topic of we have a multicultural country, or sorry, we have a multicultural um, place that we live in the world right now, Western, like I say, North America. I'm from Canada, so I'm used to saying country, but we're from, let's say North America in itself is multicultural. Yeah. The multicultural is what built our countries to what they are today. It wasn't just white, it wasn't just black, it wasn't Mexican, it wasn't Asian. It was a combination of a bunch of things. But we have one demographic group that's massively declining right now. That's what I'm talking about. I don't care about the rest of the other shit, poor versus rich, so on and so forth. I don't give a fuck about that. It's literally getting snuffed out. That's my whole question as to why. Now we're stuck in this narrative that all white people are bad. And I don't give a shit what you say. You can just sit on TikTok for 20 minutes and you'll come to that same conclusion that if you have an opinion, or if a white person uses the word white, then they're white supremacist. All right, if you're straight.
And all that I'm saying is that decline in birth rates isn't indicative of any systemic factors that are discriminating against white people. It's indicative of wealth held by white people causing a lower birth rate. We see the same thing for India, by the way. India itself used to have a higher birth rate, but even though it still has a high birth rate, it's lower than it was in 2022 and 2021 and previous years, because India is actually growing wealthier than it was in the past. So we see this across the board. So to me, the declining birth rate within white people isn't indicative of systemic discriminations. It's indicative of how fucking wealthy white people are.
Wouldn't you say that statistic is pretty staggering, though? Like, where do you think that going from 35% globally down to less than 10% globally within 100 years?
I don't know if it might be true. I don't know if that's true. I can look it up.
Go to Brooks.edu.
Let's see.
So, Athena, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, I've been trying to come up because the question that I wanted to ask you is, who do you think is orchestrating this modern day genocide of white people? Like if you're arguing that it is a structural or systemic issue, who do you think is orchestrating it?
I see. That's a question that I think that's the $1 million question. I don't know. I have no idea, but I'm just looking at what's happening around us. And then if you look at the narrative that's being spewed upon white people right now, especially on social platforms, social media platforms, which is worldwide, a lot of people, but mind you, this issue is only prominently in North America. I have to agree, it's only in North America and some parts of Europe. But this issue has been going on for the past few years now, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but I see it every day on a daily basis. I get called a racist on a daily basis just for defending what I am, who I am, what I was born into. I have to defend it. And at the end of the day, I've never in my entire life, I don't consider myself to be racist whatsoever. I mean, again, I just want to live my life. And, to be told that you can't have, I get told even in the chats here, it's really funny because you see people sitting there saying, wow, cry baby, whatever. You know what? That's what's really funny is that I'm not crying about something, and I'm not going to address half of these fucking morons out here, but just to be able to address that there's something going on, that white people are being attacked, all of a sudden I've become that racist. All of a sudden I've become that person that's, how dare you speak out on something like this? How dare you? And it's coming from a lot of white people. That's what I find funny. A lot of white apologetics that sit there and fucking cry and whine about how bad their forefathers mistreated a certain ethnic group, when worldwide this has happened throughout the millennia. It's happened in all of the past, all history. It happens. And yes, it has. Romans, Egyptians used it. Africa still uses it. Still today.
Can I say, as a white dude, I've never felt personal guilt. If anything, there's just like frustration.
I don't feel
and
guilt
anger
at all.
about. Okay, cool. Well, I don't think that guilt is productive, and I don't think that necessarily moralizing is productive. A lot of white people use these ideas to moralize and say, well, I'm more virtuous because I have these perceptions. That's not healthy. What is healthy is recognizing the history of discrimination and the presence of discrimination to this day, and the global superstructures that oppress groups of people, and saying, let us change that. That's all it is. And there's no guilt. There's no saying, as a white people, you're evil. As a white person, you're automatically evil. That's what's being said.
Yeah.
Oh, it is what's being said. Absolutely. Like, I mean, will you go into a melanated conversation with them and tell them that they're not black enough, or that their opinion doesn't matter? Would you do that? Probably not.
Whose opinion doesn't matter?
Oh, how many times? Any white person that comes up to defend themselves, that gets thrown out there all the fucking time. That always gets thrown out there. Just read chats here. Read my chats right now. It's a bunch of fucking idiots out there that are keyboard warriors that think that they can just say whatever the fuck they want to on social media. And then, one of the days they're going to slip up and they're going to say it to the wrong person in front of their face and get knocked the fuck out. But at the end of the day, this is what's happening on social media all over the place. It's white people can't have a voice right now without sounding racist. You can't, unless you're part of a marginalized community such as LGBTQ, or if you're a straight white person, you're being the most discriminated against right now in North America, and only in North America and or Western civilization. Everywhere else in the country or in the world, they don't do that.
So I would okay. So I wanted to address two things that were said, right? Number one, when we look at fertility rates for the last 70 years, fertility rates in general have decreased worldwide, with South Korea having the world's lowest fertility rate. And so I do agree with what Critically said that wealth does coincide with decreased fertility rate. I think it was a total of 50% decline. So other reasons for that, when not only wealth is the primary reason, but also other reasons for that would be kind of women's empowerment, education, and the workforce. You have lower child mortality rates as well, and the increased cause of raising children. So I think
And
those
so
are
and
the
this is the
main.
Western civilization problem. It's not a global problem, right?
I mean, globally rates have been declining. To be fair, there has been
Right.
a
But
50% decline.
the feminism movement has been on the incline.
So I mean,
This
when you look
narrative
at
saying that it's not right for you to be stay-at-home mother, that you're being suppressed, which is complete fault, like it's a complete lie. Altogether,
so.
it's a complete lie. This narrative
Mhm.
being pushed that you shouldn't have kids, that kids are
So
just a burden.
So even when you look at like the feminist argument of not necessarily having to stay at home, um, that kind of lifestyle didn't apply to all groups of people, even in North America. So when we look at Canada and when we look at the U.S., primarily it was white women who were allowed to be housewives and who were forced to stay at home. Whereas when we look at the employment rates of, for example, Black American women, it was up to 75%. So this traditional way of life where the woman stays home and the man goes to work, that didn't apply to everybody across the board and only applied to white communities.
What are you
And
talking
so,
about? What day are you talking about?
so
What year?
I'm talking about the
Uh,
40s and the 50s. So
70 years ago.
a couple of decades ago, this whole idea
That's a
of
lot more than a couple of decades. A lot more.
yeah, no, but you kind of mentioned now that feminism is telling women not to be housewives, and I just wanted to say that that traditional way of life of staying at home didn't apply to everybody, even like various decades ago. It applied to only certain demographics of people, so only white women were kind of told to stay home and have children, whereas Black women, Indigenous women were actually working outside of the home and have always been a part of the workforce. So feminism for Black women looks very different than feminism for white women, for example. Another thing.
You're talking about the past though. You're talking about like
No,
literally
but
over half a
you
century ago. When do
no,
we
but
move forward from this mindset? When do we start actually thinking forward thinking instead of looking in the past and living in the past?
no. The
This is
only reason
2023 right now.
mhm.
Show
the
me a
only
woman that can't go to work. Show me a woman that's being oppressed. That
I
can't
so
go like that. Like
mhm. so
that doesn't make sense what you're saying.
the only reason I brought it up is because you said that feminism is telling women not to stay home and not to work.
Modern
And I just
feminism.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that that traditional way of life didn't apply to everybody as well. So modern feminism is not telling everybody that because there are different types of feminism. Another thing that I wanted to bring up as well is you asked why are people from Africa and the Middle East coming over to Western countries, I think is what you were saying, if life is so bad in Western countries. When we look at, for example, there was a report released in 2017 that showed that Africa is in an economic deficit, which means much more money is leaving Africa than even entering it, with aid taken into account, with charity work also taken into account. The reason why so many people are leaving their countries, even though they don't want to leave their home, is because these countries are being destabilized and they're being overexploited by outside forces. Even when
Who's
we
the
look at
outside forces?
And their own governments as well. It's not just outside forces.
yes.
Who's the outside forces?
When we look at what the EU does, for example, when we look at what North American countries do, for example, when we look at proxy wars in Yemen and Syria, for example, you have countries like Russia, countries like Iran, countries like
So hold on,
the US and
is this
EU.
an all white thing or is this a multicultural thing that's exploiting this?
I would say there are also countries which are not white that are participating in the destabilization. I would say, though, a majority of the destabilization is being done by EU and North American countries.
Okay,
Yes.
so in North American countries, are they all just all white, or are they a multicultural country? Or sorry, they're not even a country. Canada is. Are they multicultural, or is it just all white in the armies
So when we look
making these
at
decisions?
Yeah. So when we look at who is making these decisions, of course they're not all white countries, but we have to understand that a majority of the power is still held by the white majority, right? So when we look
I'm
at
pretty sure China's creeping up.
yeah, which is precisely why I said it's not only white countries that are doing this, right? I did say that Iran and China are also participating in proxy wars. When we look at
What?
decolonialism in Africa,
Yeah.
we can see that China is also doing that, right? But what I'm saying,
I mean,
yeah,
if I may interject. So I don't think it's
I,
as much about the ethnicity of the countries that are participating. Essentially, it's always been a resource grab when it concerns like mineral wealth in Africa. This has been participated pretty much by every major first world nation around the world for hundreds of years. Like nobody is special in that resource grab.
So
no,
it wouldn't
when
be.
we look
Money.
at
Hold on. So then it wouldn't be an ethic argument whatsoever. It would be a humanitarian argument. Is this
Yes,
what humans do? Is this how
no,
humans
so
absolutely humans
behave?
do.
So when we look at, for example, the continent of Africa, right? Whether it is through the scramble of Africa, which was orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck and Germany, using the 13 Western colonial empires that existed then, whether it is the tax corporations, the business corporations, the mining industries that are working actively in Africa to exploit it, those are predominantly from Western countries, right? That is a
No,
fact,
wrong.
unfortunately.
And
What
When
is
you
the
look at
major?
Shell,
Who's
for
the major
example,
exporter of technology, like cell phones, computer chips, things like that? Who is the major exporter of that product? It sure as hell isn't Western countries.
okay, so
that's
when we're looking at mining industries, when we're looking at cocoa beans industries as well, the reason why countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast are trying to apply an extra tax on cocoa export is because they are being exploited, including all those child laborers are being exploited by Western, specifically by Swiss and other EU companies. When we look at Shell, what critically mentioned right, that is a Western country. When we look at cobalt as well that's being mined in the Congo, those are predominantly by Western countries. And this is unfortunately a fact. When we look at the fact that France implemented the CFA franc in former French colonial countries, and until today, that former French colonial countries are paying taxes to France because they're forced to send their money through the bank in Paris, the CFA franc. You can look that up. These are the facts, right? And this goes to show that EU countries and a lot of North American countries, Canada and the US, are heavily exploiting African countries. And this is a fact. I can give you various sources that goes to show that Africa has been in an economic deficit the whole time, ever since Western European colonialism started, for centuries. Whether it is when it comes to the natural resources, whether it is when it comes to land, whether it is when it comes to human resources as well. And
Okay,
so,
and there's an important factor there.
Wait, I'm sorry, critic. I just want to say one thing before I forget. I just want to say one thing before I forget because I have the memory capacity of a potato. Sorry. Also, when you look at Central American countries, right, it's a fact, unfortunately, that U.S. American foreign policy is highly responsible for destabilizing Central American countries. The last coup, if I'm not mistaken, in Honduras was in 2009. And so it's not that long time ago. So we have to take into account that the reason why people are being forced, because nobody would voluntarily leave their home and embark on this dangerous journey had their home not been safe. And the reason why a lot of these homes are not being safe is because you have a lot of outside forces that are orchestrating proxy wars or that are exploiting these countries and leaving people no other choice than to leave.
That's partial truth, Afida. That's partial truth. I'll tell the whole truth about it behind it, because I have many, many, many employees and worked with many, many people that came from Brazil, that came from Sudan, that came from these other countries, that their countries are the ones that are causing their demise, or sorry, their their politicians and their way of life is the main focus on it. It is not a coup. It's not only just coups. Yes, there are coups. Yes, that does exist, absolutely. But you can't put the blame solely on Western civilization for that.
Western
So
civilization
That's not being real at
We're
all.
the consumers of the products, but the government and the local economy is still responsible for how the people are engaged with, as far as business, as far as their living conditions, as far as resources goes. Like, their own people have a very large role in their downfall. Like, the United States is a consumer country. Europe is a consumer country. You have consumer nations
they end up on
who
the
buy
leftist
products,
list.
but they still need to be provided by these countries. It's not like, Americans are just walking over there and interfering with everything firsthand. Like, these countries are destabilizing their own countries in order to gain a profit from consumer nations. They're just as culpable as first world nations.
So can I explain that, right? You brought up Sudan. When we look at Sudan, when we look at East African countries in general, when we look at Sudan, Sudan was colonized by the British from the 1890s until 1956, after they forced them out of Sudan. When we look at Kenya, for example, Kenyans with the Mau Mau Revolution also forced out the British in the 1950s or 60s. We can see that these exploitative structures that were implemented by the British, for example, after they left, unfortunately, there were a lot of puppet politicians, corrupt politicians. Yes, I 100% agree with you on that. There have been corrupt politicians who got into power, and instead of dismantling that colonial structure that was implemented by the British, they continued being on top. They continued exploiting their own people, but doing so in order to help the British, for example. So when you look at the Kenyan president, right, a lot of land in Britain and in Kenya, for example, is owned by white British farmers. A lot of wealth is also sent to Britain. So yes, we can blame the president of Kenya and the politicians in Kenya who do exploit their own people, and we can also blame the fact that they're exploiting their own people on behalf of the British.
That is precisely the exact. That's the exact precise point that I was making. It's the problem with is it when a lot of people approach like the problem with like first world nations interfering with the economies of other countries, it's always just one single finger pointed. But everybody seems to neglect that these nations have corrupt politicians, corrupt leaders getting into office, not just getting in league with first world nations, but learning from them and adopting their policies and applying them in an even more brutal and cruel fashion. Just look at a good example like Libya and Liberia. They're still engaging in slavery. You want to look up some messed up stuff? Look up who General Butt Naked is. I know it sounds stupid, but look him up. You will see some of the most horrifying stories you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah,
and
but
this was learned behavior from first world nations. Like, yes, there is that influence, but people are adopting it, and then at that point it becomes a human issue and not just an ethnicity issue. That's my entire point.
Yeah, so who toppled Muammar Gaddafi, or who helped topple him? And also, when we look at Libya, for example, we cannot negate the fact that in 2019, the EU actually paid Libyan rebels millions and millions of euros to continue enslaving sub-Saharan refugees.
Oh, absolutely.
So Libyan rebels and also pay other.
Are we getting so off topic? I mean,
no,
literally.
the reason why I'm explaining this, host, is because I'm trying to explain to you why people leave their homes, the comfort of their homes.
Yeah, you're talking about a certain aspect of why they leave, not the entirety, is what I was saying. So, I mean, yes, there's going to be this, yes, there's going to be that. Absolutely, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But why are they? Hold on. But why are they leaving to the said country that apparently did this to them? Or to set designation that apparently did this to them?
Because that country is harboring wealth. Critically mention that.
No.
I mean, when you look at
it's the way of life. It's our standard of living. That's what it is.
Yeah, but
it's the standard of living.
Yeah, but
our standard of living is because of wealth.
Yeah,
but our standard of living is because of a lot of hard work. What do you, I mean, how many other countries? Like, I mean, let's be realistic here. Not a lot of countries have 40 to 80-hour work weeks, where people actually don't. And I've been around the world quite often. I've seen the world myself with my own eyes. And I'll tell you straight up right now, there is no way in hell North America or even Western civilization is the most relaxed civilization, because we aren't. Not all. We're overstressed, underpaid. You have to work fucking hard as a goddamn mule to get anywhere here. People say that we're living better. We're not living better. You're just working harder, and you're actually trying just to make a paycheck. So I'm not understanding the difference here, what you're talking about.
United States lifestyle is easy, to come out with me and work a full hitch on a flowback crew.
So nobody
relax in the United States looks like.
So nobody's saying that life isn't hard in the U.S. What I'm saying is that a lot of the wealth used to kind of create this standard of living was through exploitation, was through imperialism. The reason why a lot of European countries were able to build their infrastructure was because they were going around exploiting and stealing resources. The same thing.
But you're not making sense, Athena. Athena, you're not making sense. You're saying that the people that have been exploiting these other people are moving to the exact same place where the exploiters are.
Yes, because
that's all you're saying. No, that makes no sense.
Wait, no, this is important. This is why there's been so much. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so the point I was making, yes, it is purely a financial decision. They understand that, financial comforts are achievable in the United States more easily in the Northern Hemisphere, in the North Americas, than any other place on the planet. You can be successful here if you work hard. You can absolutely do that. There is no question about that. You bust your ass hard enough, you build up your skill sets, and you market yourself properly, and you can be financially comfortable here. Anybody can. I mean, I've seen truck drivers get their CDL coming over from Africa and barely be able to speak a word of English, and they're making over 6 figures in their first year. So you can come over here and make a sizable living for yourself. So they come here
Nobody's disagreeing with
that. But they also come to the United States because we have a constitution.
Jimmy, you're always welcome to come in, buddy.
Well, hold on. Well, okay, nobody's disagreeing with the ability to make money here in the U.S. What the question was asked was, why is it that that people will go to the country that supposedly was exploiting them? This is why there's a lot of literature on modern neocolonialism, because it's not the same as past colonialism, where you had a bunch of boots on the ground all the time, and a military that was actively slaughtering and murdering tons of people. That's not how a lot of modern colonialism works. It happens through the financial industry. It happens through the massive global organizations, like I mentioned, such as the IMF, the World Bank, who are supported by the EU and Western countries to be able to create these trade deals and to be able to get domestic companies to go into these other countries and be able to exploit them. That's not as overt. People aren't going to be able to analyze.
Have to get back to work.
All right,
take it easy. Let's get talking to everybody though.
Athena, he's not going to.
So just.
Hold on a second.
Well, I want to finish. Hold on, real quick.
No, for a little bit, bro.
No, hold on. No, wait, Jimmy. I just want to finish the point that I made. Hold on, real quick. I just want to finish the point that I made. The point that I made is the reason why it is the colonialism is not as overt as it used to be. It's much more subversive, much more subliminal, meaning that a lot of people don't understand the full extent to which countries exploit other countries, and can move to other countries for that reason. And as the other person mentioned as well, wealth is a massive factor too. So again,
thanks. I'm glad that you just absolutely had to get that out. I was talking about a comment that Athena just made. Athena, don't worry, he's not going to boot you unless you get rude. It doesn't matter what kind of ideology you want to bring. He's not that type of guy, okay? So if you feel like you're holding back, please don't. I wanted to let you know I agree with about 30% of everything that you just said. As far as history goes, I know we're not going to backtrack because I like to get some talk as well. What happened when those people asked the British to leave wasn't that they just wanted new rulership. They were promised something that you've been espousing covertly throughout this entire argument that you presented. And I don't understand why race has to equate to Marxism with you people all the time. You're trying to promote some sort of utopic ideology. And that's exactly what happened when the British Empire was forced to leave these countries. They were left with absolutely no ruling class and a bunch of people who thought that they knew what they were doing, but they had no clue. And they all went into poverty because they tried to implement the works of none other than Karl Marx. And that's simply what it is. It's just another further example as to why the things that you guys are espousing on apps like this will not work. I don't know why you guys are trying to be so sneaky about it. Well, I do. Because if people figured out exactly what the hell you guys are talking about, no one would want to listen to you. So anyways, go ahead.
Wait,
I had to get that out. I was frustrated, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused as to why you would bring up Marxism because I haven't.
Because you've been bringing it up the entire time I've been listening to you.
I haven't mentioned it
Oh,
once.
yes, you have. Oh, yes,
When
you
have
have.
I
Can you
mentioned
define Marxism for us, unlike the last guy?
Can I define what? You think I can't define a political ideology?
I'd like for you to, because people use that term very loosely.
Workers, right? I'm sorry. Do you think? I don't know. Can you define being a prick? I don't know why you would ever ask a question like that. Like you just assuming.
Listen, if you're intimidated by Athena's ideas or my ideas, you can just say that. But we're trying to have a productive conversation by analyzing the facts before us.
Exactly what they do. Jimmy W. Never mind the guest. Anyways, so why don't you go ahead and define it, and I'll tell you where you're wrong.
Okay, so when we talk about Marxism, we're talking about a political ideology which asserts the fact that capitalism and previous economic systems result in class exploitation, and that the moving on from that needs to result in the workers and the business owners being the means of production being democratically owned. There are variety types of Marxism. There's a variety types of Marxism. Well, there's a variety types of Marxism. There is analytical Marxism, which is less prescriptive and more descriptive.
Everybody knows these little fucking Marxist tricks aren't going to work on anybody anymore.
Okay, you're making this critical and childish. Do you want to continue a conversation, Jimmy?
Jimmy, let him finish what he's supposed to say, then you respond. Let him finish what he's going to say, then you respond. Go ahead, critical.
So the point being is that none of the analysis which looks at colonialist exploitation is inherently Marxist. You could maybe say that it pulls from elements of analytical Marxism, which isn't even advocating for a revolution or anything like that. It's simply noting trends in society associated with class exploitation. So you could look at it like that. But again, like you're not describing why it's wrong. And there are plenty of capitalists, by the way, that are analytical Marxists, and that they don't advocate for the removal of the capitalist system, but they recognize that the observations by Karl Marx,
the implementation of these ideologies, and it always sounds really good when you want to start talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but you don't understand what people don't realize is the inevitable outcome that comes from these ideologies every single freaking time. You can't fucking deny that. You just can't. And I actually want to thank Athena. I want to thank Athena for bringing up the fact that when you take away some sort of structure behind countries and everything like that, they fall flat on their face, and even more people fall into poverty and die based on a fucking ideology that's been proven wrong thousands of times across the history of man. That's all I need to fucking say. And I don't know why Marxists want to come in on a very innocuous question like, are white people being...
This is so unproductive. Do you want to have a conversation, or do you just want to rant?
Pardon me? Pardon me?
I was just asking, do you want to have a productive conversation, or do you just want to rant?
Do I want to have a conversation, or do I, like, I've been sitting listening to you guys espouse things that are factually incorrect for the last 15 minutes. Sorry if I had to get a couple things off my fucking chest.
What have I...
Thanks, Diego.
Yeah, thank you, critically. I just wanted to say one more thing. When we look at Thomas Sankara, I don't know if you have heard about him, but he actually was the president of Burkina Faso. And he implemented a lot of socialist policies, including declaring the whole year of 1985 rent-free. He took a lot of the arable land and real estate that was hoarded by or controlled over by the country's economic elite and divided them between subsistence farmers, and in the cities, social housing was also constructed. And during his presidency, Burkina Faso had almost achieved near food self-sufficiency, and he increased the literacy rate as well. But he was then assassinated by the French in the 1980s, even though his socialist policies were actually very successful in alleviating a lot of the poverty that a lot of people in Burkina Faso found themselves in. So another thing I wanted to, so Thomas Sankara, if you really want to read up on him, he was an amazing president. Another thing I wanted to say is, you said that I've been saying stuff, or critically, and I have been saying stuff that are not true. Can you tell me like a couple of things that I said that were not true, maybe?
Listen, we're not going to go into this little back and forth thing, okay? It's not funny. I'm not falling for any of this stuff.
Here we have, ladies and gentlemen, the bastion of intellectualism.
The passion of intellectualism. I'm sorry. Why don't, like, if you want to keep going back, I'm telling you exactly what you said that I was listening to that I already found absolutely wrong. I don't know if I want to go ahead and address it again.
We've really been talking historical.
Why don't you ask me a direct question? Why wouldn't you just go ahead and ask me a direct question rather than trying to ask me to espouse something that you said 15 minutes ago?
No, I did ask you a direct question. I'm literally not trying to be funny. I'm trying to have like an argument, like a discussion in good faith. And I just wanted to ask, like, what points that I made were not factual. Because I'm pretty sure, like, the stuff that I said when it came to...
So the thing that I guess you weren't listening. So what I came in and I told you was the things that you were saying about these countries that have British rule specifically that kicked out the British throne, right? That's specifically what I was talking about. You were saying that they fell apart based on the fact of greed and social structures, alluding to the fact that they didn't implement Marxism completely, which was the goal of getting rid of the British rule was in the first place, and that's why I came in and said what I said.
So I didn't mention Marxism at all. Kenya didn't try to implement Marxism. I said the reason why they fell apart.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Athena, let me ask you a question. Can I just
finish this thought and I'll let you ask me the question, right? What I said was when the British were there, they didn't cause structure, they caused chaos. And when they left, they increased that chaos and messed it up.
Would you say that was
the only structure that the British created, the white British people, were for themselves. They created structures.
Oh, that's not true. That's absolutely factually incorrect.
So when
they created entire parliamentary systems that helped rule over. You know what I mean? Like that's absolutely factually incorrect.
So when we look at former colonies, for example, we can see that a majority of the native population were thrown into poverty and were heavily exploited. The people who somehow had some type of privilege were either the white British people who were born in those countries, like for example in Jamaica, for example, the white British people were the economic elite, or people who were mixed. And the reason why people who were mixed had more opportunities was because they were half white, which is why.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. No, we're not gonna espouse it. That's actually incorrect. Sorry, can you answer my question, please, really quickly? No, we're not. Absolutely, we're not gonna. No, you're lying. Can you answer me a question?
Can you tell me
what is property?
I'm lying? Can you?
Yeah, what is property?
What do you mean? What is property?
What is property?
What kind of question is that?
What do you believe property to be?
Things that belong to people, possessions.
Critically, your turn.
Yeah, that's a fine definition. I would probably agree with that.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe you guys aren't that far gone. Anyways, I only had a couple minutes.
Wait, hold on. Were you trying to distinguish between private property and like personal property? Were you trying to get like Marxist ideas of seizing the ownership of the means of production and what it means to dissolve private property?
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay, you should have asked what private property is, because that's a different conversation if we were going to use a Marxist definition of private property.
Tell me what your belief of private property is.
Okay, so private property, according to a Marxist framework, is property which is used to be able to generate capital. It's kind of the idea. It's a little bit arbitrary where that line is placed, but whether it might be land, whether it might be infrastructure, whether it might be labor, all of these are items of property, and all of them are used to be able to generate capital for the person who owns said property. And Marx was simply analyzing how that ownership of property can be used in a way that's exploitative.
Do you think people should be able to own property?
Public, personal or private?
Any type. Pick one.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So private property. So private property, I think, should be. Of course, people can own it, but I think that private property, in the sense of property means designed to generate capital on a large scale, should be owned democratically. That's my idea on what it should be. Personal property, you can have whatever the fuck you want.
So something like a factory or something like that. People shouldn't be able to own factories.
It should be democratically owned. Yeah.
So the state should own that stuff, right?
No, not necessarily the state.
So who owns it then?
Maybe the workers, the people who are a part of it. If you employ people, they should have say over the way it runs.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to get to. That means, in my opinion, which I could be wrong on, everything that you had to say previous to this is absolutely moot, and I don't need to hear any more fucking kind of shit from you, bro.
All right. Stay smart, man. Stay smart. Oh, okay, they're gone too.
What's up, Translator? What's going on, buddy? No, he made a good point there, critically. Not much, man. What's happening? What are your thoughts, Translator?
Well, these two are clearly leaning left. You probably speak the Marxist language. You probably interpret reality through subdividing each human into their identity group. Some individuals may be punished with sins of the collective, and you mine history for grievances to suit your agenda. Because ultimately, you are the heralds of Satan that want to destroy Western civilization. You think you're doing it in the name of equality.
The heralds of Satan. I like that. I'm going to put that in my bio, the heralds of Satan.
Unknowing, because to you guys, you're narcissists that are saving everyone. You're here to save everyone because you've established the privilege hierarchy. You're coming in the name of transgender, African, dwarfs, paraplegics, all kinds of abilities that you can navigate this, and you're going to.
Is this satire?
It is.
It's satire if it's good.
Real life, because of our academics have been polluted with this Marxist nonsense and illuminates your heads and makes you speak like you're the intellectuals, but you can't point to another country in history that's been a success because this all exists in your mind. Oh no, it only failed those other times because Stalin wasn't as smart as me. Stalin wasn't as fair as me. Guess what happens to the fair ones? They get an ice pick through the eyeball in a power vacuum. You guys don't know what you're destroying. You're here to destroy the pillars.
Can we have an actual conversation? Is that possible?
No, I'm going to build a reality because you guys don't know where we're coming from. I'm saying this is how sane people see you guys. You're coming to destroy a pillar, but you don't have a pillar in the background. You've got your imagination. You've got a drawing of a perfect society that will exist because you're the one that's able to adjudicate equality. How you do this, you don't do it. It's heavily leftist. The way you interpret hatred is just absolutely obscene. You become, ironically, the hatred itself. They use this in many countries where they turn kulaks and turn citizens against each other because you're not supposed to be viewing each other through the prism of you're a woman, you're a white cisgender capitalist male with straight tendencies. I can put you at the top of the privilege hierarchy. We're going to burn you for the sins of the collective other groups because you don't understand history. You look it through an ideological lens.
you made about
I've
25
laid it out
points.
how I
Let us
think
know
you guys
when.
react to it. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So thank you for telling me what I think. I do appreciate that. It's certainly very helpful and productive. So no, the idea that so ultimately what you're doing is you're getting at aspects of sociological analysis. When you say demographics, you think about people in demographics. You're just talking about sociological analysis. And I do. Whenever I'm trying to answer certain questions, people adapt lenses. When we're trying to ask questions and relating to why a certain group of people have a certain characteristics or behave in a certain way or are treated in a certain way, you have to look demographically. So Marxism does do this, especially analytical Marxism. It does look at this lens of historical materialism, the fact that material elements, they influence the way society functions. They look at social conflict and the way that changes the way demographics work. It's all just a form of analysis. It's not some ultimate, like, we're not religious. It's not some Bible we look to for like everything about our lives. It's just helpful for us being able to look at the world in certain ways because the world is really, really fucking complex. That's all. Like, you made it to be some big scary boogie monster, but that's all it is. It's an analytical lens.
No, but actually, at the same hold on, let me interject here. At the same time, though, critically, he does make a lot of good points about it, about how people are treating each other, especially right now being white. I mean, you can't deny it critically. If you're going to deny that there's a certain agenda that's against, well, I'm referring to racism against white people. I mean, if people are saying a white person cannot be, discriminated against, or not even discriminated, but if you can't be racist towards a white person, you absolutely fucking can. I mean,
you can discriminate towards a white person, absolutely. But what we notice is that and people get this intuitively, there's a difference between just saying something mean to somebody. Like, for example, if I say, hey, Mark, I don't, the shade of, like if I were to say, the shape of your jaw, for example, I fucking hate it. It's a terrible shape of your jaw, whatever, right? You'd be like, that's kind of weird. But that wouldn't be the same as you calling, like, someone of a particular race a racial slur, because you know that one is just a random insult about some characteristic you have. The other one is representative of a larger system and historical precedents around discrimination and racism and oppression. And to me, that's why they're different. So when we say, so sure, you can discriminate against white people, and it's not good.
Systemic racism, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So if systemic racism does exist, why are Asians the top wealth earners in the United States?
Sure. So the reasons why Asians are the top wealth earners is actually relating to something that I talked about earlier, and that's because of the type of demographics that move to the U.S.
That's not systemic racism then, sir.
No. So what it is that Asian populations, their starting point in the U.S. is already well above the African American population.
That's not true. No, it's not true, critical.
But this applies to
literally just backpedaled on that one, man. You can't have systemic racism in a society if it adheres to all ethnicities except for one. You can't.
No,
that's not even true.
It seems like you have this idea that systemic racism is this overriding master category.
No
matter what.
You have that. You have that.
I don't know.
Systemic
it's the
racism
opposite.
is oppressing certain ethnic groups, and it's not.
Can I explain real quick? So this is the idea of intersectionality. So there is no force which is overriding it as a master category in every single way. Class has an influence upon your place and the amount of influence you have in society. Race does. All of these things influence. So when it comes to the Asian demographic, Asian immigrants come from a higher class background. They automatically do the same.
True. That is not true.
It's junk Marxism software.
That is not true.
It is.
You know that it's not true. You know that. You're trying to find an excuse as to why Asians are actually making more money in North America than any other demographic group is, and that's the only conclusion that you could possibly come up with that'll make sense. But it's fundamentally wrong. That is not true. You're giving up the point that, for one, a lot of Asians has two parents in the family. They study hard, a lot harder than any other ethnic group that we have in North America thus far, by far. That they go to school. That their upbringing, their way of life is much different than the average white or black man or Spanish. Or Latina, whatever they're called, Latina X. Yeah. Okay, that is one of the driving forces to all of this. But we're ignoring that whole fact. Right now, we're just ignoring it, saying, well, no, this is exactly why there's systemic racism. No, there is no systemic racism. If you work your ass off hard, you do what you need to do and get the education that you fucking need, chances are you're going to make it. Chances are you're going to be wealthier. You're going to at least be able to handle your own business. Like, let's be realistic here.
So what I wanted to, can I interject?
Okay, sorry, Athena, of course you can.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to say, when we're talking about Asian Americans, it's very important to realize that different Asians have different outcomes, right? So according to
come on, Jesus.
No, hold on.
You're talking so matter-of-factly when it's not even a matter of fact. It's just
okay. So from 1970 until 2016, the gap in the standard of living between Asians near the top and the bottom of the income ladder nearly doubled, and Asians actually displaced Black Americans as the most economically divided racial and ethnic group in the U.S. And this is according to Pew Research Center analysis, right? of government data, which means depending on where the Asian person is from, that concludes their economic status as well. So East Asians, as critically said, are going to move over to the US with much more capital, which allows them more opportunity, which means it can shield them slightly from systemic racism because they're coming from the outside. Whereas when you look at people like Cambodians, for example, people from Laos, for example, people from Sri Lanka, for example, are not going to be rich. They are predominantly very, very poor, which is why.
And so are white people, Athena. So are white people. We're predominantly poor.
So
we're not rich. What are you talking about? Like, I mean, you're literally using. I'm using the same analogy that you're going to use. I'm going to go from that same point. There are more poor white people than there are black people. There are more poor white people in North America than there are poor Asian people.
That's why we have to be proportional to the population. No, but proportional is more poor black people.
You've got to be realistic, man. I mean, let's be realistic about it. There is no ism or ist of bullshit, of systemic bullshit. It's all systemic bullshit is what it is, making you believe that there's something there holding you down. I mean, if that was the case, you wouldn't have people on the rise making more money. You have a lot of people that are melanated that are making very good bank money for themselves. What are they, the exception to the rule?
So you mentioned
Athena,
we're
making your point about the exception. Let's let her finish. I agree with Mark. It's not a very strong point because he's talking about statistics and generalized stuff, which really makes a lot more sense. But you're saying that there's exceptions to this within the races, and that there's Eastern, like the coastal Asians are smarter than the mainlanders and have more capital to succeed in our society when they get here, right? That was your point?
No. My point is not that they were smarter. My point is that it depends which wave of immigration they were a part of, why they immigrated. So, for example, when we look at people from Cambodia and Laos, a majority of them were refugees who immigrated for those precise reasons. So when they were immigrating to the U.S., they didn't have the necessary capital to build a stable life in the U.S., which is precisely why they are disproportionately affected by poverty. Whereas when we look at East Asians, like, for example, Koreans and, for example, Japanese people, especially ones who immigrated after the Korean War and after World War II, when they were immigrating to the U.S., they did have enough stability and they had enough capital to ensure them a more secure life. So I think when we're talking about Asian Americans, who again are the group with the most economic divide in the U.S., it's important to not group them up together, pretending as if they, like these claims that you made apply to all of them, right? And you brought up the Brookings.
Well, the claims that you're making, but you're making claims that apply to all of them too. You're making the exact same claim. You're just wording it differently. You are making the same claim. Okay, you have. What about Africans that come from Africa that are doing much better in the United States than they would in their homeland? Much better, and that they're very grateful of being here and being able to support their families. Or do they not count? Are they an exception to the rule?
Can I ask you how that defeats the idea of systemic racism? Because as I clarified before, racism
is based upon the premises that it's built only for a certain ethnic group to succeed and to suppress other ethnic groups. That it's a powerhouse solely around one certain group, which is a lie. That's a fundamental lie.